Yeah.
But yeah, this is a
Yeah.
pretty. I mean, this was pretty bad, man. Jeremy Corbyn, he's been suspended from the Labor Party, and he's a victim of a. I mean, Jacobin says it perfectly. It's a politicized smear campaign during his run against Boris Johnson for prime minister. Um, there was a lot of alleged anti-Semitic allegations against him.
Yeah, click on the article. Let's get to it because I don't want to. I want to get the specifics because
Yeah, let's
it
go to
turned
it.
out that there was the whole time the media in England kept reporting over and over again about Labour's anti-Semitism problem,
Yes,
and like I kept looking into it and I was like, what are they trying to claim here? And they kept trying to claim that Corbyn was some sort of
right.
longtime anti-Semite, when really it all boils down to is like he did a rally one time with some Palestinian nationalist, like I think the guy might have been,
Yeah.
uh,
So
a freedom fighter or whatever, AKA terrorist, but that doesn't, just because you like shook hands, like if you shook hands with a terrorist, does that mean that you're an anti-Semite? It makes no sense. It's all boils down to the same thing that they've
right.
been overt about, like we covered last week with that statement from Pompeo and Netanyahu.
Hmm.
They're explicitly trying to link, like Netanyahu said that modern anti-Semitism takes the form of criticism of Israel.
Right.
So that's real clever of them, like explicitly saying that now. Like, yeah, you can't criticize Israel without being called an anti-Semite,
Right. It's like
and
that.
this is the
It's like
next
that
step in that.
episode of Rick and Morty where they talk
Yeah.
about Israel for a little bit, and then he there's a part where Morty says, "You always talk about Israel when you get drunk," and then Rick tells him like, "What in what way? In a way that makes no sense." But like, wait, okay. So to be fair, I sometimes reference the geocomplexities of Israel, which is not the same as going to an anti-Semitic place.
No, like it's just, it doesn't make any sense. None of the claims ever made sense. It's like Corbyn is like a long time, he's like, just if you listen to the guy talk, he's not like Bernie. Bernie's like kind of a badass, like he's tough and like a
Right.
little mean. Corbyn's not like that. Corbyn's much more like,
Like a
um,
friendly how to do guy.
yeah, like an old hippie type who's kind of like, we'll all share, we'll hold hands, and we'll fix the NHS, mate.
Right.
Like, we'll make sure that we have food for all the Palestinian babies. But like, they kept trying to pretend that he was some raging anti-Semite, and
Right.
it didn't make any sense. But the we found out afterwards that it was pretty much the entire thing was contrived. All the
Yes.
complaints about anti-Semitism in Labor were all filed by one person. He filed 90, like I think all but two of the complaints were filed by one guy who it later came out like he was working specifically to undermine Corbyn's path um, to the election in 2017, or maybe
Right.
it was, I don't know if it was 2017 or 2019, but
Right. And then
um,
the entire movement in that election against the Labor, that led to the Tories winning. It was a very it was a concerted effort in a lot of ways. When you're talking about like the Brexit party that was meant to subvert
mhm.
votes away from Labor, but it wasn't running in certain areas where it wasn't politically advantageous to the Tories.
No, it was kind of like
It was meant
it
to
was
it was
sort
meant
of
to be
like
a spoiler party for Labor, and it worked to great effect.
yeah. And then, but I mean, I think the main thing that did it was the constant barrage of stories claiming that Labor was anti-Semitic. Like,
Yes, that eventually takes a
it's
fucking
different there.
toll.
Well,
Like,
like Jews in America tend to vote Democrat, right? Like,
right.
it's different there, right? They tend to vote Tory, um, which I guess they were trying to make sure the younger generation stayed voting Tory and didn't go to Labor. I don't understand like the
Yeah.
basis of it, but that's the same playbook they were trying to run on Bernie, but weren't able to. Like
Yeah, I mean, look, they
fucking Boris
if
Johnson wrote a
Bernie
book, right?
if Bernie was
Boris
not
Johnson wrote a book.
Jewish, look, we've said this before.
Yeah.
If Bernie was not Jewish, they would have accused him of anti-Semitism, especially since he came out for Palestine, for Palestinian rights. You know, and
Well, like
they
they
would
were
have
trying to
used
do it
that.
to him today too.
Right.
He gave a speech today. Did you see that? We can
Yes.
get to that eventually, but
Yeah.
just for linking white supremacism with Israel, they said
Yes.
that that was somehow anti-Semitic because he said that white supremacism occurs in Israel. But
Oh,
like,
wow. You know, but I
um,
think it's part of his. You know, he has a privileged position in that way as being part of the Jewish community.
but look at this says though. Like, the Human Rights Watchdog found Labor responsible for unlawful harassment and discrimination during Corbyn's 4.5 years as leader. Um, he said it was dramatically overstated by opponents. Um, and that's what got him suspended for a failure to retract his words. But like that's objectively true. Like we found evidence that they were objectively trying to sandbag him and they were leaking this
Yes.
stuff to the press. Like if you look at the number of complaints and the number of stories in the media, like I saw a tweet earlier that was the number of times that each party was referenced in the British media with anti-Semitism keywords, and there was like none for the Tories, even though fucking Boris Johnson wrote that book that's basically about like a global like Jewish conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
Like
So,
that
like
was
it
what he
says
did
that
before he was
Labor
in
was
politics.
responsible for 3 breaches of the Equality Act: political interference and anti-Semitism complaints, failure to provide adequate training to those who handling anti-Semitism complaints, harassment, including the use of anti-Semitic tropes, and suggesting that the complaints of anti-Semitism were fake or
But they
smears.
were fake.
They were they were fake and
They were
smears.
fake. It was one person. One person did them all. That's the other thing too. The adequate training, that stuff was based on the fact that his complaints weren't being addressed quick enough. But that was due to the nature of the way the complaints came in, because he would put
Yeah.
them the way that the guy
Read
who was filing these complaints to,
this
he
is
was
funny.
filing them in such a way that it was
Yeah. No, I mean, like it's
that it was impossible for them to be
Yeah.
processed quickly enough.
right. But like this is funny. This explosive political parting of ways provoked in part by Mr. Corbyn's trademark determination not to bend.
Wait, like, I mean, this is the BBC continuing their,
Yes,
their
exactly.
slanted
So
coverage.
this is one of
but
the main
like,
the culprits of who was spreading the anti-Semitism bullshit against Corbyn. You know,
with taxpayer money too.
yes, exactly.
You know,
And like
it's like PBS taking the money and like criticizing.
So, let's see. So here, let's go to this one. Where the hell is it?
It's just a joke, and these people are all on Twitter today being like, "Oh, I'm so traumatized. Like, oh, this has been such a nightmare for me," acting like they're suffering because at some point in the past, Corbyn like hung out with somebody who was critical of Palestine, like of
Right.
the Palestinian situation. Like,
Right.
it's so bizarre that they're claiming to be victims in this situation when it's like, it's not like he was going around like calling people slurs. It's not like any of this stuff was happening. It's strictly, like anti-Zionism, basically, right? Like,
Yeah, basically. Which here we go. So Jeremy Corbyn has been suspended from Labour Party pending an investigation. A party spokesman said the former leader has also been stripped of the Labour whip on the House of Commons. The announcement came shortly after the current leader, Sir Keir Starmer, dug pressure from disciplinary action following the damning report by the Equality of Human Rights Commission on anti-Semitism in Labour under Mr. Corbyn's leadership. The suspension was sparked not by the contents of the report, but by the defiant statement in which the former leader rejected some of its findings and said the allegations of anti-Semitism have been dramatically overstated and for political reasons, which is 100%
but
fucking
they
true.
were. I don't understand how they can claim that's not true. If all of the complaints were filed by one person,
Yes.
like I said, all but 2 of them, I think. So say there was 2 legitimate complaints, right? Which, for a major party like that, that's pretty good, right? If you only have 2 complaints, like
Right.
in an entire 2-year period, I think it was.
Right.
And the other guy who was found to be like working with this faction, this like labor faction, basically like the corporate labor section, like it's not quite the same, but it basically would be like, if Bernie was running and Kamala and Pete and people like that were working to undermine him by leaking these stories to the press, and having one of their staffers constantly complaining that Bernie was anti-Semitic, something like that,
Because I'm
right?
telling you,
Like
you
if they
can't.
filed a report every week.
Well, that's the thing. They couldn't. I mean, they would do it if they think that if they thought that they could get away with calling Bernie an anti-Semite, which doesn't work.
Yeah.
It does not work. You just go and read his family's history with the Holocaust, and it blows up in your damn faces when you try that smear. Now, in the future, they will roll that out against any progressive that runs, whether it be Nina Turner, AOC, or anybody that tries to go and fill that mantle in the to run for president.
Look at Ilhan Omar.
Of course, look what they do to Ilhan.
Look what they did to her.
Yes, they will
Yeah.
do that to anybody from the left that goes ahead and tries to run, and it'll be complete bullshit every time. But this was the word from Jeremy Corbyn. I will strongly contest the political intervention to suspend me. I made absolutely clear those who deny that there's been an anti-Semitism problem in the Labour Party are wrong. I will continue to support a zero tolerance policy towards all forms of racism. So,
It's just so transparent.
yeah,
Like it's
absolutely.
so like craven and callous. Like it.
See,
God, I just don't know
there you go.
how they can get away. It drives me nuts. That's right.
Yeah, we don't like
It drives me
Kamala around here.
nuts.
Mhm.
It just drives me nuts that there's these people who are like continuing to pretend that there's some truth to it, and they're continuing to pretend that they're like some sort of victim here.
Mhm.
It's just like people believe this. Plenty of people bought this. Like I saw that
Yes.
stat, something like what? Like was it like 40% of Jews in Britain said that they would consider leaving the country if Corbyn won
Yes,
prime
because they
minister?
believe that
Like
he was an
yeah,
actual
they believe
anti-Semite.
this shit because it was on the news every night.
So it was undeniable that a false impression had been created by a number of members of the number of members accused of anti-Semitism. As polling shows, this is what has been overstated.
This is what has been overstated.
Yeah, not the seriousness of the problem. I will continue to support a zero tolerance policy towards all forms of racism, and I urge all members to stay calm and focused while this problem is resolved amicably. I believe it will be to defeat this awful government, which is further impoverishing the poorest in society. You know,
And they just suspended somebody a few weeks ago too for something like this. I forget what it was. For she like she was in a she had an interview or someone on the BBC had an interview on their show when one of the guests said something in passing about the Palestinian situation, and that was enough to get her suspended. Like they're really trying to enforce a zero tolerance policy. Like you can't reference Palestine at all. Like that's their goal, right? They're trying to make it so it's just a complete taboo to say anything at all about what's going on there. And like, which is so fucked up that the settlements are illegal by international law. There's been nothing to like. That's the other thing too with Russiagate, right? Like the one instance they have of collusion between Kushner and the Russians, or between Trump and the Russians, right? The one thing they have hard evidence for was when Kushner asked the Russians to veto that the thing condemning the settlements, right?
Right.
And they refused to do it, right? Which kind of blows up the whole Russiagate narrative to begin with. So that's why the liberals don't ever talk about it. But like, we know that this is what they're doing, right? They're trying to manufacture this consent all over the place, and it's fucking gross. And I just wish more people saw through it because it's intimidating, right? Like people are terrified to speak out because this is what happens.
Yes, and nobody wants to go and like, and you know the other part of the Israel story too is that whole way that it went down when Netanyahu retained power over there. That whole process was sus as fuck. And if you criticized Netanyahu and his right-wing government, then they go right into that, oh, you're an anti-Semite place.
I mean, he's like Trump, though. It's like, how can you not criticize him? He's the equivalent of Trump, like, if not worse. I mean, I guess he's, it's hard to say who's worse.
It's really amazing how that works, though. Like right away, if you criticize their government, if you criticize the human rights atrocities that Israel is engaged in, then you get responses like, Oh, you don't believe in Israel's right to exist? What?
No, I
What?
don't believe in their right to exist as an apartheid state.
Yes.
Like,
Like
it's like those
you
trolls
don't
are
believe in a
like,
Jewish state. Like, I mean, really?
yeah,
Really? Yeah,
they're
and
some of the worst people on the internet, man.
yeah.
Those like Zionist psychos, like they
I mean, I don't even think
are
they
just
believe what they're
very.
crap what
No,
they're
I don't think
saying.
they can. They
No.
can't. Like, there's no way these people who are posting that stuff today actually believe that they're like traumatized victims because at some point, like, the labor leader said that Palestinians deserve human rights.
Yeah.
Like, that's basically what it boils down to.
Yes.
Oh, you're traumatized because this politician said that Palestinians are, are humans and deserve human rights. So,
Exactly. So
you know, you that
uh,
traumatizes you, you fucking deserve to be traumatized.